It was just another busy afternoon at a fancy downtown restaurant, the kind where polished silverware sparkles under soft lighting, and the smell of expensive meals fills the air. Business people came and went, laughter echoing over wine glasses and designer plates. In the middle of all the luxury, unnoticed by the diners, a young waitress named Maria worked quietly, clearing tables and refilling drinks with a tired but polite smile. No one really saw her. To them, she was just another part of the background. But behind her quiet eyes, Maria was carrying the heavy weight of a life she never chose. Maria wasn't just tired, she was starving. Not in the way people say when they skip lunch, but truly painfully hungry. Her pay barely covered rent in the tiny apartment she shared with her younger brother. Most nights, she gave up her own dinner to make sure he had enough. But today, the hunger was unbearable. After her shift ended and the restaurant cleared out, she walked past the kitchen, where leftover food was being thrown away like it meant nothing. Her stomach turned at the smell, but her need was stronger than her pride. She glanced around to make sure no one was watching, then quietly reached into the trash bin, pulling out a half-eaten sandwich still wrapped in its paper. Her hands trembled as she brought it to her lips. She didn't want to do this. She didn't want to be seen like this, but she was out of options. What Maria didn't know was that someone was watching. In the corner of the restaurant, a man had paused near the doorway, coat slung over his arm, phone in hand. He wasn't just any man. He was the CEO of the restaurant chain, Mr. Donovan Reed. He had come in unannounced that day to check on operations, dressed like any other guest. From across the room, he had noticed her hard work, her quiet dedication. But what he saw now stopped him cold. In that moment, time felt like it froze. Why would one of his employees be so desperate that she'd eat from the trash? He had built his brand on luxury, on care, on quality. But here was a woman in his very own restaurant, reduced to scavenging for scraps. Something about the way she tried to hide it, the quiet shame on her face, hit him harder than he expected. Mr. Reed took a step forward, then stopped. He had a choice to make. And what he did next would not only change Maria's life, but reveal something much deeper about who he really was. What happened after left the entire staff stunned. Mr. Reed didn't say a word right away. He simply watched as Maria took another bite, her eyes darting nervously toward the back entrance, praying no one saw her. She quickly wiped her mouth with the back of her sleeve, then stood up straight, as if trying to gather whatever dignity she had left. Her apron was stained, her hands shaky, but she forced herself to walk toward the locker room like nothing had happened. That image stuck with him, not just because it was shocking, but because it didn't make sense. Donovan Reed had built his company with the belief that every employee, from the kitchen staff to the waiters, deserved fair wages and decent treatment. He trusted the managers to uphold those values. Yet here was one of his own workers, digging through garbage just to eat. Something had gone terribly wrong, and he was determined to find out what. Back in the office of the restaurant, Donovan asked for Maria's employee file. The manager on duty, a slick man named Trevor, seemed nervous. He laughed it off, saying Maria was a quiet girl who kept to herself, probably just had a bad day. But Donovan wasn't buying it. There was something in Trevor's tone, too casual, too dismissive, that made him wonder what else was being brushed under the rug. Maria, meanwhile, was in the locker room, sitting on a worn wooden bench, holding back tears. She had no idea what Mr. Reed had seen. To her, he was just another customer who had come and gone. She didn't know he was the CEO. And even if she did, what would it matter? People in power didn't care about girls like her. She was used to being invisible. She had learned how to survive that way. Her story wasn't one she told anyone. After losing both parents in a car accident 2 years ago, Maria had dropped out of college to raise her little brother Danny. Every dollar she earned went to groceries, bills, and his school supplies. Some nights, she went to bed hungry just to keep the heat on. She never complained. She just worked harder. But there was only so much one person could take. As Donovan flipped through her file, he saw glowing customer reviews, notes from other staff about how reliable she was, and barely a single complaint. It didn't add up. Why would someone like that be suffering so quietly? He closed the file slowly, his mind racing. Something told him this wasn't just about one girl. Maybe this restaurant, maybe his whole company, wasn't as perfect as he thought. And just as he was about to call Maria in for a conversation, his phone buzzed with a message that made his heart sink. The message on Donovan's phone was from a former employee, an anonymous tip that simply read, "Asterisk, check the books at the Fifth Avenue location. Staff's been covering up unpaid hours and skimming wages. Maria isn't the only one." Asterisk. His chest tightened. He had suspected something wasn't right, but this confirmed it. Now it wasn't just about one waitress caught eating out of the trash. It was about the entire culture that had been allowed to fester under his nose. The Fifth Avenue restaurant was supposed to be a flagship, elegant, efficient, and ethical. But if employees were being exploited, if managers like Trevor were turning a blind eye or worse, participating, everything he stood for was at risk. Down in the staff hallway, Maria was buttoning up her coat, ready to leave for the night. Her shift was done, and with a few crumpled bills from tips in her pocket, she was headed to the bus stop. She didn't know yet that something had shifted upstairs. She didn't know that her quiet suffering had been noticed, or that questions were being asked in places where her voice had never reached before. Meanwhile, Trevor stood by the hostess stand, pacing. He had noticed the way Donovan looked at Maria, and he wasn't stupid. He'd been with the company long enough to know when the higher-ups were on edge. He started to sweat, remembering the times he had adjusted clock-ins to meet budget goals, the moments he dismissed complaints about late checks or missing overtime. It was standard practice in some restaurants, he always told himself. But now it felt like a storm was coming. As Donovan left the office and stepped out into the dining room, he scanned the restaurant with new eyes. Every smile from a server looked forced. Every quiet corner whispered secrets. He had trusted too many people for too long. And he had let the distance between the top and the bottom grow too wide. Back in Maria's small apartment, her brother Danny was setting the table, just 2 bowls, 1 box of noodles, and a flickering candle for light. He was only 13, but he carried himself like someone much older. He had seen the toll life had taken on his sister, and though he never said it, he worried about her constantly. He hated seeing her come home late, exhausted, pretending she wasn't hungry. He noticed things, like how she smiled less, and how sometimes she just stared at the wall when she thought he wasn't looking. That night, as Maria quietly joined him at the table, Donovan was making a decision that would change the course of both their lives. But the next move wasn't his alone, because someone else had noticed what was happening, and they had plans of their own. Plans that could destroy everything. The next morning, Maria arrived early, just like she always did. She moved quietly through the kitchen, tying her apron, trying to ignore the tight knot in her stomach. She still didn't know that someone had seen her the night before, and she had no idea what was about to unfold. All she knew was that bills were due, Danny needed lunch money, and she couldn't afford to lose this job, no matter how hard it had become. Trevor watched her from the office window, jaw clenched. He had spent the night combing through old shift logs and deleting anything that might look suspicious. He told himself it was just business. Numbers didn't lie, but they could be cleaned up. He never thought anyone would dig this deep, and now he was scrambling to protect not just his job, but his reputation. Donovan had already made calls that morning. He brought in an internal audit team, telling them to keep things discreet. He didn't want to tip anyone off before he had the full picture. But he wasn't just looking at records anymore. He wanted to talk to people, the ones who actually worked the floor, who lived paycheck to paycheck. If there was more than one Maria, he was going to find out. He started with the line cooks, asking simple questions about hours, breaks, paydays. Some of them shrugged it off. Others hesitated, eyes flickering with caution. Then one of them, a dishwasher named Louis, finally spoke. "Sometimes we work extra. They don't always put it in the system. Trevor says it's just to help the restaurant." Donovan thanked him and left, his heart pounding. The pieces were falling into place. What he didn't realize yet was that Trevor had overheard the conversation, and he was starting to panic. If the CEO found out everything, he'd be out. Worse, he could face legal trouble. And Trevor wasn't the kind of man to go down without a fight. That afternoon, Maria was called into the office. She stepped in nervously, expecting to be reprimanded. But instead of Trevor behind the desk, it was Donovan. He stood when she entered, calm but serious. She froze. She finally recognized him. And in that moment, all the fear, all the exhaustion, seemed to close in around her. Before he could say anything, a loud crash echoed from the hallway. One of the kitchen staff burst through the door, breathless. "There's a problem. You need to come see this." Donovan rushed out, Maria following close behind. What they found near the staff lockers changed everything. It wasn't just about stolen hours anymore. Something had been uncovered, something Trevor had desperately tried to hide. And now it was too late to stop what was coming. Donovan and Maria rushed down the hall, following the shaken kitchen staffer who had interrupted their meeting. The hallway buzzed with tension as more employees peeked out of the kitchen, sensing something was wrong. When they reached the lockers, the source of the commotion became clear. A door to a small storage closet stood wide open, its lock broken, papers scattered across the floor like fallen leaves. But it wasn't just the mess that made everyone stop in their tracks. Inside the closet, taped to the back of a shelf, were dozens of pay stubs, old, crumpled, and many of them marked with handwritten notes. Some were missing hours. Others had names that didn't even match current employees. It was a paper trail, evidence of something much deeper than wage theft. Maria stepped closer, her eyes widening as she recognized the handwriting on one of the notes. It was Trevor's. Donovan picked up a few of the stubs, flipping through them with disbelief. This wasn't just about unpaid hours anymore. It looked like Trevor had created a system to funnel wages from fake employees, post workers, into another account. That account could have been his. If true, it was fraud. And worse, it had likely gone on for years without being noticed. Maria felt her stomach drop. All this time, she thought she was just unlucky, overworked, or invisible. But now she was staring at proof that people like her weren't just forgotten. They were being used. She looked at Donovan, trying to read his face, but he was locked in focus, trying to process the scale of the problem. Suddenly, a voice echoed behind them. "Everyone needs to get back to work. This doesn't concern the staff." Trevor stood at the end of the hallway, trying to sound in control, but there was a sharp edge of panic in his voice. His eyes landed on Maria and Donovan, then shifted to the scattered documents. His face turned pale. "You've got some explaining to do," Donovan said, his voice low but steady. But before Trevor could respond, another voice cut through the tension. It was Louis, the dishwasher who had spoken earlier. "He made us stay late, off the clock. Said if we talked, we'd lose our jobs. A ripple of voices followed, others stepping forward, some nodding, some speaking up for the first time. The fear that had kept them silent was cracking. Trevor backed away a step, then another. "This is all being taken out of context," he stammered. "You don't understand how hard it is to keep a place like this running." But Donovan wasn't listening. His mind was spinning, not just with anger, but with the realization that this restaurant wasn't the only one. If this happened here, what about the others? The truth was bigger than he ever expected. And someone else already knew. Trevor took another step back, cornered by the rising voices of the staff. Donovan moved forward slowly, holding the papers in his hand like proof of betrayal. For a moment, no one spoke. The only sound was the soft hum of the kitchen fan and the weight of everything finally coming to light. Maria stood quietly among them, her heart pounding in her chest. This place that had once felt like her only hope had become the center of something much darker. Donovan turned to the staff. "No one is losing their job today," he said firmly. "But there will be changes, starting now." He looked Trevor in the eye. "You've stolen from the people who built this restaurant with their bare hands. You lied. You intimidated. And you did it under my name." Trevor's face twisted, defiant even as the truth closed in on him. "You think this only happened here? You think you really know your company?" he snapped. "You've been too busy shaking hands at the top to notice what happens at the bottom." Donovan didn't flinch. "Maybe I didn't see it before, but I see it now." He nodded to security, who had arrived moments earlier after being alerted by the audit team. They stepped in and quietly escorted Trevor out as the staff watched in stunned silence. For many of them, it was the first time they felt seen. Later that afternoon, Donovan gathered the employees in the dining area. He spoke openly about what had happened, about the audit that would now extend across every restaurant in the chain, and about how he had failed to protect them. But he promised things would change. He wasn't just speaking as a CEO anymore. He was speaking as someone who finally understood the cost of looking away. Then he turned to Maria. "You reminded me what leadership is supposed to look like," he said. "Not power, not titles, but integrity." He offered her a new position, one that would let her work in staff relations, helping to improve working conditions across all branches. Her eyes welled with tears. Not because of the title, but because someone had finally believed her story mattered. Just as the staff began to applaud, Donovan's phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't a warning. It was an alert from the audit team. One of the smaller branches, hours away in a different city, had just reported the exact same wage fraud scheme. Only this time, Trevor hadn't managed it. Someone else had. The rot was deeper than anyone thought. And the real cleanup was only just beginning. In the weeks that followed, a quiet transformation began across Donovan Reed's restaurant empire. What had started as one shocking discovery at a single location grew into a company-wide investigation. Each restaurant was reviewed, each payroll audited, and every employee given a chance to speak without fear. It was exhausting, uncomfortable work, but necessary. And this time, Donovan wasn't sending someone else to do it. He was showing up himself, asking questions, listening, rebuilding trust face to face. Maria accepted the new role with hesitation at first. She didn't see herself as a leader. She had spent so long feeling small, just trying to survive. But with every story she heard from other staff, dishwashers, servers, cooks, she realized she wasn't alone. And her voice mattered. She started traveling between branches, sitting down with employees, collecting stories, and pushing for better hours, better pay, and simple dignity in the workplace. One day, she came home to find her little brother Danny waiting at the table, a homemade card in his hand. It said, "You're my hero," in messy blue ink. She smiled, holding back tears. For the first time in a long time, their apartment felt like a home again, not just a place to sleep between shifts. Trevor's case moved quickly. The evidence was overwhelming, and he was soon facing legal consequences. But what shocked everyone was the identity of the person behind the second location's fraud. It wasn't a manager, it was an assistant accountant working behind the scenes. They had mimicked Trevor's tactics after realizing how easy it had been to manipulate the system. It was clear this wasn't about one bad apple. It was a warning about what happens when good people stop paying attention. Donovan used the experience to reshape his leadership. He created an employee hotline, increased transparency in payroll systems, and began holding regular town halls with staff at every level. The story of the poor waitress caught eating from the trash had become a symbol, not of shame, but of change. Maria never wanted the spotlight. But her courage, that one quiet moment when she thought no one was watching, sparked a ripple across an entire company. What began with hunger and hardship turned into a movement for fairness, respect, and humanity in the workplace. The restaurant still bustled with laughter, clinking glasses, and the smells of fine dining. But behind the scenes, things were different now. People were being seen. People were being heard. And no one would ever have to eat from the trash again.